Voltaire was not born with the famous name the world knows today. He entered the world in Paris in the year 1694 under the name François-Marie Arouet. He came from a solid middle-class family. His father worked as a notary and hoped his young son would pursue a safe and respected career in law. Young François had entirely different plans for his life. He showed a brilliant mind for language and poetry from an early age. He loved to observe society, and he possessed a sharp wit that both delighted his friends and terrified his enemies. As a young man, François began writing poems and satirical verses that mocked the corrupt authority of the French aristocracy and high officials. His sharp tongue quickly brought him into conflict with powerful figures. He was imprisoned in the Bastille for nearly a year because of verses he wrote criticizing the ruler of France. Far from breaking his spirit, his time in prison gave him time to reflect and write. It was during this period of confinement that he chose the name Voltaire. The name was a stylish pen name that marked his independence from his family expectations and his transformation into a bold public intellectual. Voltaire spent the rest of his long life as a playwright, historian, poet, and philosopher. He became one of the most famous men in all of Europe. People across the continent read his letters, attended his plays, and debated his ideas. He corresponded with kings, queens, scholars, and ordinary citizens. He accumulated great wealth through clever investments, which gave him the rare freedom to write without fear of financial ruin. Yet despite his wealth and fame, Voltaire remained a constant troublemaker for the ruling institutions of his day. He was exiled from France multiple times, forced to move from city to city, and spent decades living near borders so he could escape if authorities came to arrest him. To understand Voltaire, one must understand that he was not an academic thinker who spent his days writing dense theory for small classrooms. He was a practical fighter who used his words as weapons against injustice. He believed that philosophy belonged in the public square, where it could change hearts, influence laws, and improve daily human existence. He fought against cruelty, superstition, and abusive power wherever he saw it. Voltaire was a man of intense passion for truth, deep humor, and an unyielding commitment to human freedom. He lived a life of action, writing thousands of letters, essays, and stories that reshaped how human beings think about authority and freedom. To understand the philosophy of Voltaire, one must first step back and look at the dramatic historical era in which he lived. This era is known as the Enlightenment, a name that captures a massive shift in how human beings thought about the world and their place in it. The word itself suggests the sudden turning on of a bright light in a dark room. Before this remarkable period, Western society was dominated by centuries of unquestioned tradition, absolute political power, and rigid religious control. Most people lived in a state of intellectual darkness, accepting whatever their leaders told them without asking for proof or logic. For hundreds of years across Europe, authority flowed strictly from the top down. Kings and queens claimed to rule by divine right, which meant they believed their power came directly from God. Under this system, to disobey a king was not merely a political crime, but a sin against the creator of the universe. The common people had no say in how they were governed, what taxes they paid, or what laws were created. At the same time, religious institutions exercised total control over human thought. The church dictated what books could be read, what scientific ideas could be taught, and what personal beliefs were acceptable. Anyone who dared to offer a different view was labeled a heretic, a dangerous rebel who threatened the order of society. In this traditional world, fear and superstition shaped daily life. Plagues, famines, and natural disasters were routinely viewed as divine anger or the work of evil spirits. Medicine was primitive and often harmful, based on ancient guesses rather than scientific testing. Justice was harsh, arbitrary, and secretive. Courts regularly used physical torture to force confessions from accused individuals, and public executions were treated as common entertainment. Education was reserved for a tiny wealthy elite, while the vast majority of the population could neither read nor write. People accepted their difficult lives as an unchangeable fate, hoping for relief only in the afterlife. The Enlightenment challenged this entire way of looking at existence. It began with a bold new idea, the belief that human beings possess the gift of reason, and that this reason can be used to understand nature, improve society, and solve human problems. Instead of relying on ancient texts written thousands of years ago, thinkers began to emphasize direct observation, careful experimentation, and clear logic. They argued that truth is not something handed down by authority figures, but something that must be discovered through evidence and critical thought. This shift in thinking was heavily inspired by the dramatic scientific breakthroughs of the 17th century. Great scientists like Nicolaus Copernicus, Galileo Galilei, and Isaac Newton had shown that the physical universe operates according to natural laws that can be understood through mathematics and science. They proved that the Earth revolves around the Sun, and that gravity governs the movement of the planets. These discoveries shattered the old belief that the physical world was unpredictable or controlled by magical forces. Philosophers like Voltaire looked at these scientific triumphs and asked a simple but revolutionary question. If human reason can discover the laws that govern the stars and planets, can it not also discover the principles that should govern human societies? If we can use observation to cure diseases and understand nature, can we not also use reason to fix unjust laws, eliminate torture, end religious violence, and create better governments? This was the central dream of the Enlightenment, the application of rational thought to every single aspect of human life. Voltaire emerged as the most famous and effective champion of this dream. He was not the first thinker to propose these ideas, but he was undeniably the greatest communicator of the movement. Brilliant scientists and philosophers had written dense, difficult treatises in Latin that only highly educated scholars could read. Voltaire realized that if real change was going to happen, these new ideas had to reach the wider public. He dedicated his life to translating complex philosophy and science into clear, engaging, and lively language that ordinary people could understand and enjoy. A pivotal moment in Voltaire's life occurred when he spent several years living in exile in England. During his time there, he observed a society that was vastly different from his homeland of France. In England, the power of the king was limited by a parliament, giving citizens a voice in their government. Courts provided basic legal protections, and individuals could not be thrown into prison indefinitely without a trial. Furthermore, people of different religious faiths lived side by side, trading together in markets and worshipping peacefully without constant bloody conflicts. Voltaire was deeply moved by what he saw in England. He studied the works of the philosopher John Locke, who argued that governments exist to protect the natural rights of citizens, including their life, liberty, and property. He also studied the revolutionary scientific work of Isaac Newton. When Voltaire returned to mainland Europe, he wrote a series of essays describing English society, science, and politics. These writings introduced millions of continental European readers to the concepts of constitutional government, scientific reasoning, and religious tolerance. The publication of these ideas caused an immediate uproar among French authorities. The books were publicly burned by order of the government, and an arrest warrant was issued for Voltaire. This reaction was typical of how established powers responded to the Enlightenment. Monarchs and high church officials recognized that critical thinking was a direct threat to their absolute power. If people learned to think for themselves in matters of science and religion, it would only be a matter of time before they began to question the legitimacy of absolute rulers and corrupt systems. To suppress these dangerous new ideas, governments across Europe established vast networks of censors. Every book, essay, play, and pamphlet had to be reviewed and approved by state officials before it could be printed. Writers who published unauthorized works faced severe penalties, including hefty fines, loss of property, long prison terms, or exile. Many printers had their presses seized and destroyed for distributing banned material. Voltaire spent much of his adult life playing a dangerous game with these censors. He became a master of evasion and strategy. He published many of his most controversial books anonymously or under various fake names. He established printing operations outside of France, in places like Holland and Switzerland, where local laws were more relaxed. Once printed, thousands of copies were packed into barrels or hidden beneath shipments of ordinary goods, and smuggled across borders into France. When confronted by authorities about a radical new book, Voltaire would routinely deny being the author, even while everyone recognized his distinctive literary style. Despite this relentless suppression, the demand for Enlightenment writings grew rapidly. A reading revolution was taking place across Europe. Literacy rates were rising, especially among the growing middle class in urban areas. People gathered in private living rooms known as salons, as well as public coffee houses, to read books, debate fresh ideas, and discuss current events. For the first time in European history, a genuine public opinion began to form. This public opinion became a powerful new force that even absolute kings could not completely ignore. Voltaire understood the unique power of this growing reading public. He realized that public outrage could force corrupt officials to rethink their actions. Whenever an act of legal cruelty or religious injustice took place, Voltaire picked up his pen and exposed it to the world. His essays, letters, and pamphlets moved thousands of readers to tears and anger, turning individual local tragedies into international scandals that demanded reform. At the core of the Enlightenment was an unshakable belief in human progress. Previous generations had viewed human history as a long downfall from an ancient golden age, or as a static valley of tears that humans simply had to endure until they reached heaven. Enlightenment thinkers rejected this fatalistic view. They argued that history is an open path and that human conditions can steadily improve over time. Through the power of education, scientific discovery, humane laws, and rational governance, each generation can leave behind a world that is healthier, fairer, and more prosperous than the one they inherited. This belief in progress gave people a profound sense of purpose and agency. It taught that human misery was not an unchangeable law of nature or a permanent divine punishment, but a set of practical problems that could be studied and solved. Poverty, disease, crime, and tyranny were no longer seen as inevitable aspects of existence, but as challenges that rational human effort could gradually overcome. The movement also fundamentally reshaped how society viewed the individual. Under the old feudal structure, a person's value and status were determined almost entirely by the family into which they were born. A child born to a peasant family remained a peasant for life, with virtually no opportunity to advance, while a child born to a noble family was granted wealth, land, and political power regardless of their actual talent or character. Enlightenment philosophers, led by figures like Voltaire, argued that every human being possesses basic dignity and the capacity to reason. They asserted that true human worth should be measured by a person's character, knowledge, and practical contributions to society, rather than by birthright or titles. This revolutionary idea laid the emotional and moral groundwork for modern concepts of equal opportunity and universal human rights. Education was viewed as the essential engine for driving this societal transformation. Voltaire and his contemporaries believed that ignorance was the main root of human suffering, cruelty, and religious fanaticism. When people are left uneducated, they are easily controlled by fear, superstition, and tyrannical leaders. By providing broad education that emphasizes critical thinking and scientific facts, society could build a lasting defense against tyranny and irrational panic. Education was not just a tool for learning a trade, but the key to intellectual independence and personal freedom. The legal system was another area desperately in need of Enlightenment reform. In 18th century Europe, laws were often confusing, inconsistent, and deeply unjust. Nobles and wealthy individuals frequently received light penalties for crimes, while poor citizens faced brutal punishments for minor offenses. Trials were often held in secret, accused persons were denied defense lawyers, and confessions were routinely extracted through intense physical pain. Voltaire fought passionately against these barbaric practices throughout his life. He argued that laws must be public, clear, fair, and applied equally to all people regardless of their social standing. He insisted that the purpose of a legal system should be to protect society and deliver genuine justice, rather than to exact cruel vengeance or display government terror. His energetic campaigning helped inspire legal reforms across Europe, leading to the gradual abolition of judicial torture and the creation of fairer court procedures. The Enlightenment also transformed the way history was studied and written. For centuries, historical accounts had been little more than boring lists of royal genealogies, military victories, and religious miracles written to praise powerful rulers. Voltaire revolutionized historical writing by focusing instead on the evolution of culture, commerce, science, art, and everyday human life. He wanted history to be a practical study of human experience, showing how societies develop, how bad ideas lead to disaster, and how rational decisions lead to human flourishing. Through his vast network of correspondence, Voltaire helped connect scholars, leaders, and citizens across the entire Western world. He wrote thousands of letters to figures ranging from ordinary readers to powerful monarchs like King Frederick the Great of Prussia and Empress Catherine the Great of Russia. In these letters, he continuously advocated for religious tolerance, legal reform, free expression, and the support of science and art. This constant exchange of ideas helped build an international community of minds dedicated to progress. It proved that ideas could transcend national borders and unite people in a shared commitment to human dignity. The Enlightenment was not merely a brief intellectual trend, but a fundamental reshaping of human consciousness. By placing reason above tradition, liberty above tyranny, and tolerance above fanaticism, the Enlightenment laid the foundations for the modern world. It gave birth to modern democracy, scientific inquiry, legal justice, and human rights. Voltaire stood as the bright, beating heart of this movement, using his wit, courage, and tireless energy to ensure that the light of reason would scatter the darkness of ignorance and oppression. The spirit of the Enlightenment also brought about a significant shift in how people viewed religion and personal conscience. Prior to this era, monarchs believed that maintaining a single, mandatory state religion was necessary for social order and national unity. Anyone who practiced a different religion or who questioned official church doctrines was viewed as a traitor to the state. This rigid mindset had fueled devastating religious wars across Europe for centuries, leaving millions of innocent people dead and entire regions destroyed. Enlightenment thinkers offered a radically different perspective on human belief. They argued that genuine religious faith cannot be forced upon a person through threats, fines, or physical violence. True belief must come from a person in a conviction and free choice. Voltaire continually reminded his readers that forcing people to profess beliefs they do not truly hold only produces hypocrites and liars. He argued that a nation filled with diverse religious beliefs, where every person is free to worship according to their own conscience, is far more peaceful and prosperous than a nation that uses violence to enforce uniformity. This new perspective led to the concept of secularization, the gradual separation of religious authority from civil government. Thinkers began to argue that the role of government is not to save souls or enforce religious rules, but to maintain peace, protect property, ensure justice, and preserve individual rights. Religious faith, they asserted, is a private matter between an individual and their conscience or creator. This separation of church and state eventually became one of the most vital foundations of modern democratic societies. Furthermore, the Enlightenment transformed the role of the writer and intellectual in society. In earlier centuries, writers and artists relied almost entirely on the financial sponsorship of wealthy nobles or church leaders. As a result, they were often forced to write works that praised their sponsors and supported the status quo. Voltaire was one of the first major intellectuals to achieve financial independence through clever business ventures and successful publishing. This financial independence allowed him to write with absolute freedom, speaking truth to power without fear of losing his livelihood. He set a bold new example for future generations of authors, journalists, and activists. He demonstrated that a writer could be an independent voice for justice, using the power of the press to hold powerful institutions accountable to the public. Through his courage and success, Voltaire transformed the public intellectual into a crucial defender of human rights and social progress. As the 18th century progressed, the ideas of the Enlightenment spread far beyond the borders of Europe. They traveled across the Atlantic Ocean to the American colonies, where leaders like Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, and John Adams read Enlightenment books with enthusiasm. When these leaders came together to form a new nation, they built its founding documents directly upon Enlightenment principles, including individual liberty, government by consent, freedom of speech, and the separation of powers. In Europe, the movement set in motion deep social shifts that eventually shattered the old regime. While Voltaire himself preferred peaceful reform led by educated leaders rather than violent revolution, the critical mindset he fostered could not be easily contained. By teaching millions of people to question absolute authority, challenge unjust laws, and demand basic human rights, the Enlightenment fundamentally altered the course of human history. When we look back at this transformative era, we see that it was not just a collection of abstract theories, but an active, courageous battle for human freedom. It was a movement driven by the deep conviction that the world can be changed for the better through human effort, logic, and compassion. At the absolute center of this grand intellectual struggle stood Voltaire, holding high the torch of reason and leading humanity out of the darkness of the past. In the philosophy of Voltaire, no enemy was more dangerous, destructive, or terrifying than fanaticism. He saw fanaticism as a terrible disease of the human mind, a state of violent madness where logical thought is completely destroyed by blind passion. Fanaticism is not simply holding a strong opinion or being devoted to a cause. It is the absolute, unshakable belief that one possesses the ultimate truth, combined with the willingness to force that truth upon others through violence, intimidation, and cruelty. Voltaire spent his entire life studying how this mental poison takes hold of individuals and societies, and he dedicated his pen to fighting it wherever it appeared in the world around him. The roots of fanaticism lie deep within human fear, vulnerability, and superstition. When human beings are uneducated and live in constant anxiety regarding the unknown, they naturally crave simple answers and absolute certainty. Religious and political systems throughout history have taken advantage of this human weakness by offering complete, unquestionable doctrines. They tell their followers that they are the chosen ones, that their beliefs are sacred, and that anyone who disagrees is not merely mistaken, but evil. Once a person accepts this rigid mindset, their mind closes completely to any new evidence, logic, or alternative perspective. They no longer see members of other groups as fellow human beings with valid feelings, but as dangerous threats that must be conquered or destroyed. Voltaire was particularly disturbed by how fanaticism transforms ordinary, peaceful citizens into cruel executioners. Under normal circumstances, a human being possesses a natural sense of empathy and compassion. We naturally feel pain when we see another person suffering, and we hesitate to cause harm to our neighbors. Fanaticism destroys this natural moral compass. It replaces human empathy with a toxic sense of holy duty. When a fanatic commits a cruel act, they do not feel guilt or remorse. Instead, they believe they are performing a noble service for God, for their religion, or for a higher political cause. This mental twist makes the fanatic far more dangerous than an ordinary criminal, because a criminal usually knows they are doing wrong, while a fanatic believes their cruelty is righteous and pure. One of the most famous observations made by Voltaire directly addresses this psychological mechanism. He noted that those who can make you believe absurdities can make you commit atrocities. This profound insight exposes the direct link between foolish beliefs and violent actions. When a person is taught to accept ridiculous claims without demanding proof, they surrender their ability to think critically. Once critical thinking is abandoned, that person can easily be convinced to perform horrific acts in defense of those ridiculous claims. Voltaire understood that bad ideas are never harmless. Nonsensical beliefs in the mind eventually turn into blood on the streets, as people use their irrational convictions to justify harming others. The only effective shield against this dangerous madness is human reason. Reason is the quiet, disciplined process of examining facts, weighing evidence, and thinking clearly before reaching a conclusion. Where fanaticism is loud, emotional, and aggressive, reason is calm, patient, and thoughtful. Reason asks questions instead of demanding immediate submission. It invites open debate, welcomes new facts, and adjusts its conclusions when fresh evidence appears. Voltaire argued that reason is the highest gift given to humanity because it allows us to rise above our lowest instincts of fear, rage, and tribal hatred. A fundamental element of rational thinking is the willingness to accept doubt. Fanatics despise doubt above all things. They demand total certainty and view any hesitation or questioning as a sign of weakness, corruption, or treason. Voltaire took the opposite view, arguing that doubt is an essential sign of intellectual health and maturity. He famously remarked that doubt is not a pleasant condition, but certainty is an absurd one. To be completely certain about complex matters of religion, metaphysics, or human nature is to ignore the obvious limits of human knowledge. By embracing a healthy degree of doubt, we protect ourselves from the arrogance that drives fanatical behavior. Throughout history, the absence of reason and doubt has led to catastrophic human suffering. Voltaire frequently pointed to the religious wars that devastated Europe as clear proof of the horrors of fanaticism. For generations, armies marched across the continent, burning entire cities, destroying crops, and slaughtering thousands of innocent men, women, and children. The people committing these horrific acts belonged to different branches of the same general religion, yet they tortured and killed each other over minor differences in theological doctrine. Voltaire looked at these bloody conflicts with deep horror and anger, pointing out that no loving God could possibly desire such mindless carnage among human beings. Voltaire also recognized that fanaticism is routinely manipulated by powerful leaders for their own selfish gain. Rulers, corrupt priests, and ambitious politicians often discover that it is far easier to control a population driven by fanatical hatred than one guided by calm reason. By whipping up public frenzy against a minority group, a foreign nation, or an independent thinker, leaders can easily distract the public from internal problems like corruption, high taxes, poverty, and misgovernment. Fanaticism acts as a powerful drug that blinds people to their own oppression, making them willing tools in the hands of tyrants who care nothing for their well-being. In his writings, Voltaire often described fanaticism as an infectious mental plague. Just as a physical disease spreads rapidly through a crowded city, fanatical ideas can spread like wildfire through a crowd of people. When individuals gather in an emotional mob, their individual reason is easily overwhelmed by the collective energy of the crowd. People who would never dream of harming a neighbor on their own will willingly participate in riots, persecutions, and public executions when acting as part of a fanatical group. Voltaire saw it as the duty of every philosopher and educated citizen to act as a doctor to society, applying the medicine of rational thought to stop the spread of this mental epidemic. The cure for fanaticism requires a sustained effort to educate society in the habits of critical inquiry. Voltaire believed that education should not merely consist of memorizing facts or absorbing official state doctrines. Real education must teach people how to think for themselves, how to analyze arguments, and how to spot logical fallacies and emotional manipulation. When citizens are trained to ask for evidence and evaluate claims objectively, they become immune to the propaganda of fanatical movements. A rational public is the strongest defense a society can have against tyranny and ideological madness. Practicing reason also fosters a deep sense of intellectual humility. When we use reason to examine the world, we quickly realize how vast the universe is and how little we actually understand about existence. This realization softens our ego and makes us far more patient with others who hold different views. An intellectually humble person recognizes that their own beliefs might be incomplete or mistaken, which makes them willing to listen to differing points of view. Voltaire believed that if human beings could cultivate this quiet humility, the fires of fanaticism would instantly die out for lack of fuel. Reason creates the essential conditions for peaceful human cooperation. Fanaticism divides the world into rigid camps of good and evil, making peaceful compromise impossible. Reason, on the other hand, provides a common ground where people of different backgrounds, cultures, and traditions can meet and communicate. Logic and evidence do not belong to any single tribe, nation, or religion. They are universal tools shared by all human beings. By relying on reason, societies can settle disputes through peaceful debate, fair laws, and mutual understanding, rather than through violence, destruction, and war. Voltaire was under no illusion that the fight against fanaticism would be quick or easy. He knew that the temptation to seek absolute certainty and give in to emotional rage is deeply rooted in human nature. Every generation, he warned, will face its own unique forms of fanaticism, whether religious, political, or social. The battle between reason and fanaticism is not a temporary conflict with a single final victory, but a permanent duty that must be renewed by every era. To lower our guard for even a moment is to risk sliding back into the dark ages of persecution and public violence. For Voltaire, the defense of reason against fanaticism was not an abstract academic exercise. It was a matter of life and death for human civilization. Every act of torture, every burned book, every innocent person executed for their beliefs was a stark reminder of what happens when fanaticism triumphs over logical thought. By raising his voice against this madness, Voltaire showed the world that rational thought is not merely an intellectual tool, but a moral duty. Reason is the light that protects human dignity, preserves freedom, and allows humanity to build a more just and compassionate world. As we reflect on Voltaire's message today, we see how deeply relevant his insights remain. Whenever we witness hatred replacing dialogue, whenever mob mentality overrides individual judgment, and whenever absolute certainty drives people to silence or harm those who disagree, fanaticism is at work. The philosophy of Voltaire calls upon each of us to be vigilant, to challenge absurdities, to embrace doubt, and to champion calm reason in our daily lives. Only through an unyielding commitment to rational thought can we prevent the shadows of fanaticism from darkening our world once again. Voltaire understood that fanaticism often disguises itself as virtue. Fanatics rarely see themselves as cruel or destructive. They view themselves as defenders of truth, purity, and morality. This deceptive nature makes fanaticism especially dangerous, as it allows people to perform evil deeds while maintaining a clean conscience. Voltaire constantly peeled away these false disguises, showing that any virtue that requires cruelty, censorship, or the destruction of human life is not a virtue at all, but a dangerous delusion. To combat this deceptive virtue, Voltaire used the power of clear language and sharp logic. He refused to let fanatics hide behind vague, grand-sounding words like holy duty or national purity. He insisted on reducing every argument to its basic practical facts, asking simple questions about who was being hurt and who was benefiting from the violence. By stripping away the poetic rhetoric used by extremists, Voltaire exposed the ugly reality of fanatical movements, making it much harder for decent people to support them. Ultimately, Voltaire's vision of reason was grounded in a deep love for human life and human happiness. He did not advocate for reason simply because he enjoyed abstract logic or philosophical debate. He fought for reason because he wanted people to live peaceful, joyful lives free from fear, torture, and sudden violence. He knew that a rational world is a gentler world, a place where people can farm their fields, write their books, raise their children, and enjoy the short span of human existence without the constant threat of fanatical destruction. By placing reason at the very center of his philosophy, Voltaire provided humanity with an enduring toolkit for freedom. He taught us that our minds are our highest defense against oppression and that thinking clearly is an act of courage. His battle against fanaticism laid the foundation for modern free societies, where diversity of thought is protected and power is held accountable by logic and evidence. As long as human beings value truth and freedom, the rational voice of Voltaire will continue to guide and inspire us. Freedom of thought stands as the absolute foundation of the philosophy of Voltaire. He believed that the right to think freely is not a privilege granted by governments or religious institutions, but an inherent natural right of every human being. Without the freedom to use one mind, to question authority, and to explore new ideas, human progress comes to a complete halt. Voltaire recognized that a society that controls or punishes thought is a society trapped in permanent childhood, unable to grow, mature, or fix its own mistakes. In the world in which Voltaire lived, freedom of thought was virtually non-existent across most of Europe. Governments and church leaders believed that allowing ordinary citizens to think for themselves would lead directly to chaos and social collapse. They claimed that truth was already known and fully established by official authorities. Therefore, any private opinion that contradicted official teaching was seen as a dangerous crime. People were expected to accept official doctrines without question, and those who dared to express original thoughts faced severe punishments, including fines, imprisonment, loss of property, and even death. Voltaire saw this systematic control of human thought as a profound insult to human dignity. He argued that the mind is naturally designed to seek truth through observation, reasoning, and experience. To force a person to accept a belief that goes against their own logic is to commit a form of intellectual violence. Voltaire pointed out that no authority figure, no matter how powerful or wealthy, possesses a monopoly on truth. Rulers and priests are human beings, subject to the same errors, biases, and ignorance as everyone else. Therefore, granting any institution the power to dictate what people must think is a recipe for perpetual tyranny and corruption. Furthermore, Voltaire recognized that trying to control thought is an impossible and unnatural task. A government can control physical actions, it can seize property, and it can lock a body in a stone cell, but it can never truly control the internal workings of the human mind. When a government tries to force people to profess beliefs they do not actually hold, it does not change their minds. It simply forces them to become hypocrites and liars. Society is then filled with individuals who pretend to agree with official doctrines out of fear, while hiding their true feelings in secret. Voltaire argued that a society built on fear and forced hypocrisy is inherently fragile and morally corrupt. Censorship was the primary tool used by authorities to crush freedom of thought, and Voltaire fought against it relentlessly. In his day, every book, article, essay, and play had to pass through government censors before it could be printed and sold to the public. Censors possessed the power to cut out any paragraph, ban any book, and destroy printing presses if they felt an author was being too critical. Voltaire spent decades battling these censorship laws. He understood that censorship does not protect society from bad ideas, but instead protects corrupt leaders from being exposed. Censorship keeps the public in ignorance, preventing the exposure of injustice and halting the spread of useful knowledge. Voltaire argued that the best way to combat bad ideas is not through censorship or punishment, but through open debate and better ideas. When ideas are allowed to compete freely in the public square, foolish or harmful notions are eventually exposed and rejected through reason and evidence. However, when an idea is banned and hidden away, it often gains an unnatural fascination and power, as people assume the government is hiding something important. By allowing all ideas to be expressed and examined openly, society builds a natural defense against falsehood and manipulation. A key distinction in the philosophy of Voltaire is the difference between thought and action. He clearly understood that a government must have the authority to regulate actions that cause direct physical harm to others, such as theft, violence, and murder. However, he insisted that thoughts, beliefs, opinions, and spoken words must remain completely free from state interference. A person should never be punished for what they think, write, or say, as long as they are not inciting immediate violence or causing physical harm to their neighbors. By drawing a clear boundary between private thought and public action, Voltaire laid the legal foundation for modern free societies. Voltaire also emphasized the great benefit that freedom of thought brings to human culture, science, and prosperity. Every major scientific discovery, every masterpiece of art, and every advance in human rights began as a radical new thought in the mind of an individual. If society automatically suppresses new thoughts simply because they differ from existing tradition, then discovery and innovation become impossible. Progress requires the freedom to challenge established consensus, to test new hypotheses, and to look at old problems in fresh ways. A nation that protects freedom of thought becomes vibrant, inventive, and prosperous, while a nation that suppresses thought becomes stagnant and poor. The defense of freedom of thought requires immense moral courage. Voltaire knew firsthand the great personal risk involved in speaking truth to power. He witnessed friends and fellow writers being thrown into dark prisons or forced into exile simply for writing books that challenged official views. Yet he insisted that standing up for freedom of thought is a supreme moral duty. When intellectuals, writers, and citizens remain silent out of fear, they become complicit in their own oppression. Voltaire used his fame, wealth, and literary talent to shield younger writers, fund independent printing operations, and constantly push back against state interference. Perhaps the most profound aspect of the view of Voltaire on freedom of thought is his insistence on protecting the rights of those with whom we disagree. It is easy and comfortable to defend freedom of thought for ideas that we personally like or find acceptable. The true test of a commitment to freedom comes when we are confronted with ideas that we dislike, find offensive, or strongly oppose. Voltaire understood that if we allow the government to silence opinions we dislike today, we give that same government the power to silence our own opinions tomorrow. Freedom of thought must be universal, protecting every voice, or it will eventually protect no one at all. In the long view of history, the tireless crusade of Voltaire for freedom of thought helped spark a major transformation in global political governance. His ideas directly influenced the creators of modern democratic constitutions, which explicitly guarantee the freedom of speech, the press, and private conscience. These protections were not created as luxury features, but as essential safeguards against tyranny. Modern free nations exist precisely because thinkers like Voltaire insisted that the human mind belongs to the individual, not to the state or the church. As we examine our world today, the insights of Voltaire on freedom of thought remain urgently relevant. While the methods of communication have changed dramatically with modern technology, the basic temptation of powerful institutions to control what people read, think, and say remains strong. Censorship, social pressure to conform, and the suppression of dissenting views continue to threaten human progress. The philosophy of Voltaire reminds us that freedom of thought is a fragile treasure that must be actively defended by every generation. We must remain vigilant against all forms of intellectual coercion, honoring the right of every human being to think, reason, and speak for themselves. Voltaire recognized that true intellectual freedom brings a deep personal responsibility. Having the right to think freely does not mean one should think carelessly. Voltaire urged people to examine their own biases, to demand evidence for their beliefs, and to subject their own opinions to the same sharp logic they apply to others. Freedom of thought is not an excuse for lazy thinking or willful ignorance. It is an invitation to engage in the serious, lifelong work of seeking truth and improving one understanding of the world. Throughout his vast writings, Voltaire illustrated how freedom of thought leads to genuine tolerance and social harmony. When people are free to hold different opinions without fear of persecution, they learn to live side by side in peace. Diversity of thought creates a rich, dynamic society where individuals are judged by their character and contributions rather than their conformity to a single doctrine. By breaking the chains that bound the human mind for centuries, Voltaire helped launch an era of unprecedented human creativity, scientific achievement, and individual liberty. His voice continues to remind humanity that the mind must always remain free. Religious tolerance is one of the central pillars of the philosophy of Voltaire. Throughout his long life, he witnessed the devastating effects of religious hatred, persecution, and sectarian division. He saw a European continent that had been torn apart by centuries of bloody conflict, where neighbor turned against neighbor over subtle differences in theological doctrine. Voltaire argued that forcing human beings to conform to a single religious belief is not only impossible, but morally wrong and deeply harmful to society. For Voltaire, religious tolerance was not an optional luxury or a vague moral ideal, but an urgent practical necessity for the survival of human civilization. To understand why Voltaire fought so passionately for religious tolerance, one must look at the tragic historical background of the era that preceded him. After the Protestant Reformation, Europe split into opposing religious camps. Catholic and Protestant nations fought brutal wars that lasted for decades, resulting in the loss of millions of innocent lives. Horrific events, such as the Saint Bartholomew Day massacre in France, where thousands of Protestants were murdered in a matter of days, left a dark stain on European history. In many countries, practicing the wrong form of religion was treated as a major crime punishable by physical torture, long imprisonment, or public execution. Voltaire examined this history of religious violence with intense horror and disgust. He argued that it is completely absurd for one group of human beings to murder or persecute another group simply because they hold different opinions about divine matters. He pointed out that no single human being, church, or political institution possesses a complete and perfect understanding of the ultimate creator of the universe. When frail and limited human beings claim to know the exact mind of God and use that claim to justify cruelty, they display monstrous arrogance. Voltaire insisted that if a religion is truly good and divine, it should win people over through kindness, love, and good examples, rather than through fear, physical force, and executioners. During his years of exile in England, Voltaire witnessed firsthand how religious tolerance functions in a practical society. In London, he observed members of many different Christian denominations, as well as Jewish citizens and non-believers, gathering together at the Royal Exchange to conduct business in peace. In that bustling marketplace, no one cared whether a merchant was a Catholic, an Anglican, a Quaker, or a Presbyterian. The only thing that mattered was whether the merchant was honest and fulfilled their agreements. Voltaire observed that when a society permits many different faiths to exist freely, those faiths learn to live side by side in harmony and mutual respect. However, when a government attempts to enforce a single mandatory religion, it inevitably generates endless conflict, resentment, and secret resistance. Voltaire also pointed out that religious intolerance is deeply damaging to the economic health and social stability of a nation. When a government persecutes religious minorities, it drives away its most hardworking, skilled and educated citizens. For example, when the French monarchy revoked the legal protections of Protestant citizens, hundreds of thousands of talented craftsmen, merchants, scholars, and soldiers fled the country to settle in more welcoming nations. This massive exile weakened France economically and culturally while enriching its foreign rivals. Voltaire demonstrated that tolerance creates economic prosperity, fosters social unity, and strengthens the state by allowing all citizens to contribute their unique skills to the common good. In his famous treatise on tolerance, Voltaire presented powerful moral and human arguments against religious persecution. He reminded his readers that all human beings are brothers and sisters, created by the same ultimate author of nature. We all share the same fragile human condition, suffering from the same physical ailments, facing the same daily hardships, and eventually meeting the same inescapable death. Given our shared human struggle, it is heartbreaking and foolish for people to hate and destroy one another over abstract theological technicalities. Voltaire wrote that if the Creator had intended for all human beings to hold identical beliefs, everyone would have been made with identical minds. The vast diversity of the natural world clearly suggests that variety is an intentional part of the design of existence. Voltaire strongly condemned the dangerous alliance between political rulers and religious institutions. When kings and governments use physical force to enforce religious uniformity, they transform faith from a personal spiritual matter into a brutal tool of state control. Political leaders routinely use religious zeal to justify aggressive foreign wars, suppress domestic political opposition, and consolidate their own authority. Voltaire argued that civil government must remain completely neutral in matters of faith. The proper role of civil authorities is to enforce fair laws, protect physical safety, defend property, and preserve social peace, rather than judging the spiritual condition of private human souls. Another major theme in the writings of Voltaire is the profound hypocrisy created by religious persecution. When individuals are threatened with torture, long prison terms, or the confiscation of their property unless they adopt official religious practices, many people will simply pretend to believe what they do not. Intolerance does not change human hearts or persuade human minds. it merely forces people to become deceptive. It creates a society filled with superficial conformity and hidden dishonesty. Voltaire argued that a legal or religious system that rewards deceit and punishes honest conviction is fundamentally corrupt. Genuine belief must be freely chosen, and free choice requires the total absence of physical or financial threats. The relentless campaign of Voltaire for religious tolerance helped bring about a major shift in European legal systems and social values. His essays, stories, and letters convinced educated citizens, government officials, and foreign monarchs that religious persecution was both cruel and counterproductive. Over time, European nations began to dismantle laws that restricted the rights of religious minorities and removed religious tests for holding public office. The principles of religious freedom and the separation of spiritual authority from civil government, which was central to the philosophical work of Voltaire, ultimately became foundational elements of modern democratic societies around the world. The message of Voltaire regarding religious tolerance remains deeply relevant in our contemporary world. Although humanity has made vast technical progress, religious hatred, sectarian conflict, and ideological fanaticism continue to cause suffering in many regions. Voltaire reminds us that tolerance is not merely a passive acceptance of differences, but an active commitment to respecting the right of every individual to seek truth according to their own conscience. By choosing tolerance over force, we build a world where diverse communities can coexist peacefully, bound together by shared human dignity and mutual respect. Voltaire demonstrated that true intellectual and moral strength lies in openness, that true peace requires mutual respect, and that a love of truth must never be used as an excuse for cruelty to others. By exposing the irrational nature of religious violence and defending the sanctity of free conscience, Voltaire helped lead humanity toward a more compassionate, civilized, and peaceful existence. His passionate defense of religious tolerance continues to serve as an inspiring guide for everyone working to build a society rooted in freedom, justice, and human fraternity. Chapter 6: Deism. Voltaire held a unique position regarding religion and God that set him apart from both traditional religious believers and total atheists. His belief system is known as Deism, a philosophy that was widely held by many leading thinkers of the Enlightenment. Deism rejected the rigid doctrines, rituals, and miracles of organized religion, while maintaining a firm belief in the existence of a supreme creator who designed the universe. For Voltaire, belief in God was not a matter of blind faith in ancient books or church authority, but a logical conclusion based on observing the order and beauty of the natural world. One of the central ideas of Deism is the concept of God as a master architect or a divine watchmaker. Voltaire argued that when a person looks at a complex pocket watch with all its intricate gears, springs, and wheels working together in perfect harmony to tell time, that person naturally concludes that an intelligent watchmaker created it. A watch does not build itself by random chance. In the same way, when we look at the immense universe, the precise movements of the stars, the regular cycle of the seasons, and the incredible design of living creatures, our reason tells us that there must be a supreme intelligence behind it all. Voltaire famously observed that the universe fills him with wonder, and he cannot conceive that such a magnificent clock could exist without a master clockmaker. However, the deism of Voltaire differed radically from traditional Christian, Jewish, or Islamic theology. Traditional religions teach that God actively intervenes in human history, performing miraculous events, suspending the laws of nature, listening to individual prayers, and punishing or rewarding people in real time. Voltaire rejected all claims of divine miracles and special revelations. He argued that the natural laws created by God are perfect and unchangeable. A divine creator who constantly changes the rules of nature to grant personal favors or perform tricks for human spectators would be an imperfect and inconsistent architect. For Voltaire, God created the universe, established universal laws of physics and nature, and then allowed the universe to run according to those rational principles. Because Voltaire believed God is revealed through the natural world and human reason, he saw no need for organized priests, holy scriptures, or elaborate church rituals. He argued that ancient holy books were written by human beings in specific historical eras, filled with human errors, historical inaccuracies, and primitive moral concepts. He criticized the idea that any single church or priesthood could act as an exclusive middleman between humanity and God. In the view of Voltaire, a person does not need to visit a magnificent cathedral, pay money to priests, or recite specific ancient formulas to honor the Creator. A person honors God simply by using their mind to understand nature, seeking truth, and treating fellow human beings with justice and compassion. Voltaire found himself in a constant philosophical battle on two fronts. On one side, he fought against religious fanatics and traditionalists who accused him of being an evil atheist who wanted to destroy all morality in society. On the other side, he argued against radical atheist philosophers of his era who claimed that the universe was purely physical matter, moving by random chance, with no higher purpose or creator. Voltaire believed that both positions were wrong. He argued that traditional religion leads to dangerous superstition and violence, while total atheism removes the fundamental sense of moral order and accountability that holds human society together. Deism offered a rational middle path, a way to acknowledge the divine without falling into the trap of religious madness. For Voltaire, morality did not depend on fear of hell or hope of going to heaven as taught by traditional churches. In his view, human morality is rooted in reason, human nature, and social utility. God gave human beings reason and a natural sense of justice so that we could live together in peaceful societies, doing good deeds, acting honestly, helping the poor. And standing up against injustice are not duties we perform to earn spiritual points or avoid eternal torment in the afterlife. They are practical duties we owe to one another as fellow human beings living in a shared world. Voltaire believed that a person who does good simply because it is right and rational is far more virtuous than a person who does good out of fear of divine punishment. The concept of prayer takes on a completely different meaning in the Deism of Voltaire. Traditional prayer often involves begging God for personal favors, asking for rain during a drought, requesting victory in a war, or praying for a sick relative to be healed miraculously. Voltaire saw this type of prayer as foolish and arrogant, as if a tiny human being could convince the eternal architect of the universe to alter universal physical laws for personal convenience. In the philosophy of Voltaire, prayer should not be a list of demands, but an expression of quiet gratitude and reverence for the beauty, scale, and grandeur of creation. True reverence consists in accepting the natural laws of existence and living a productive, ethical life. Voltaire argued that Deism provided a solid foundation for universal human brotherhood and peace. Traditional religions, with their competing dogmas, holy texts, and exclusive claims to truth, naturally divide humanity into opposing tribes that hate and fight one another. Deism, by contrast, relies on universal human reason and observation of nature, which are available to every human being regardless of where they were born. Whether a person lives in Europe, Asia, Africa, or the Americas, they can look at the night sky and appreciate the harmony of the cosmos. By stripping away local myths and ritual demands, Deism offers a simple, common faith that can unite all human beings in mutual respect and shared morality. Deism aligned perfectly with the rapid growth of modern science during the Enlightenment. Scientists like Isaac Newton were showing that physical forces like gravity operated everywhere according to predictable mathematical principles. Voltaire embraced these scientific discoveries with immense excitement, seeing them as clear confirmation of his deist worldview. Science was not an enemy of God, but the ultimate way to understand divine wisdom. By studying physics, astronomy, chemistry, and biology, scientists were uncovering the magnificent blueprint of the master builder. In this way, Deism brought religion and scientific inquiry into total alignment, replacing mystical guessing with rational discovery. Voltaire famously wrote that if God did not exist, it would be necessary to invent him. This famous statement reflects his deep conviction that belief in a supreme moral intelligence is essential for maintaining social order, hope, and human morality. Without a shared belief in a fundamental moral structure to the universe, society risks falling into moral chaos where might makes right. However, Voltaire made sure to emphasize that the God worth believing in is a God of justice, reason, and universal love, not a petty, vengeful tyrant who commands his followers to burn books and murder people who hold different beliefs. Furthermore, Voltaire emphasized that Deism promotes true human self-reliance. In traditional religious systems, human beings are often taught to view themselves as helpless, miserable sinners who can do nothing good without supernatural intervention. People were encouraged to pray for magic solutions to poverty, disease, and social injustice, rather than taking active steps to solve their own problems. Deism turns this passive worldview upside down. By teaching that God set the world in motion and gave humans the tools of reason and empathy, Deism places the responsibility for human well-being squarely on human shoulders. If society is broken, unjust, or ignorant, it is up to us to fix it through hard work, rational laws, and social reform. Voltaire also pointed out that Deism removes the corrupt financial motives that often taint organized religion. Throughout history, religious institutions accumulated vast wealth by selling indulgences, charging fees for sacred rituals, and demanding taxes from poor citizens under the threat of spiritual damnation. Deism requires no temples, no paid priesthood, and no financial sacrifices. Because God needs nothing from human beings, no person can claim to collect money on behalf of the divine. This financial simplicity strips away the opportunities for greed and exploitation that had corrupted so many religious leaders over the centuries. In addition, Deism changes how human beings view death and the afterlife. Traditional religions often use horrifying descriptions of eternal physical torment in hell to frighten believers into obedience. Voltaire viewed these horrific depictions of hell as cruel inventions created by human tyrants to manipulate vulnerable minds. A just and rational creator, Voltaire argued, would never inflict infinite torture on finite human beings for failing to follow confusing theological doctrines. Deism replaces spiritual terror with calm acceptance of the natural order. Death is simply a natural part of the universal cycle designed by the Creator, and a life lived with honesty and kindness is the best possible preparation for whatever lies beyond. Voltaire constantly contrasted the clean, simple nature of Deism with the cluttered, dark world of superstition. Superstition fills human lives with constant anxiety, making people fear evil spirits, curses, bad omens, and angry deities that must be constantly appeased with sacrifices and payments to priests. Deism frees the human mind from this psychological slavery. It teaches that the creator of the universe is not a moody dictator who delights in human suffering or fear, but a rational architect who built a world governed by cause and effect. When people understand this truth, they no longer waste their lives in fear, but instead direct their energy towards scientific education, legal reform, and practical kindness. In several of his philosophical stories, Voltaire used a cosmic perspective to show the insignificance of human religious squabbles when viewed against the immense vastness of the universe. He asked his readers to imagine an intelligent visitor from a distant star observing our tiny planet Earth. To such a cosmic observer, the fierce wars fought between different religious factions over tiny details of doctrine looked completely absurd and tragic. Voltaire used this vast perspective to humble human pride and show that our petty sectarian divisions have no cosmic importance. What truly matters in the vast universe is how we treat one another during our brief stay on this small planet. The deist philosophy of Voltaire had a profound and lasting impact on the modern world. It influenced many of the key figures who shaped modern democratic nations, including several founding fathers of the United States like Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, and Thomas Paine. These leaders adopted a similar deist outlook, which allowed them to design governments that were neutral towards specific religious sects while respecting freedom of conscience. By separating the idea of God from the control of organized churches, Voltaire helped liberate the human spirit, encouraging people to revere the divine while using their minds freely to build a better world. Ultimately, the deism of Voltaire represents a triumphant effort to reconcile faith with reason. He refused to abandon belief in a supreme creator, Yet he refused equally hard to surrender his rational mind to corrupt human institutions and absurd dogmas. He showed that a person can be deeply thoughtful, scientifically minded, and completely devoted to freedom without abandoning a sense of cosmic wonder and moral purpose. His deist philosophy remains an inspiring blueprint for anyone seeking a rational, compassionate, and open-minded approach to the ultimate questions of existence. Chapter 7. Écrasez l'infime. As Voltaire reached the later years of his life, his philosophical battle against human suffering and tyranny became focused into a single, immortal battle cry. That phrase, written in French as Écrasez l'infime, became the most famous motto in the entire history of the Enlightenment. Translated into English, the phrase means "crush the infamous thing." Voltaire signed hundreds of private letters to his friends, fellow philosophers, scholars, and public figures with these words. Sometimes he wrote out the full phrase, and sometimes he simply abbreviated it as a sharp, urgent reminder at the bottom of a page. It was not merely a catchy slogan, but an energetic declaration of war against the corrupt institutions, toxic beliefs, and systemic cruelty that held human civilization in chains. To understand the full power of this motto, one must first clearly understand what Voltaire meant by the infamous thing. Many of his conservative enemies and religious critics accused him of trying to destroy God, undermine morality, and tear down all social order. This was a complete misrepresentation of his true philosophical position. As a committed deist, Voltaire held a deep reverence for the ultimate creator of the natural universe, and he believed that genuine moral goodness was essential for human survival. The infamous thing was not God, nor was it personal spiritual faith, nor was it the comforting personal beliefs that helped ordinary people deal with the hardships of life. Instead, the infamous thing represented the terrible combination of religious fanaticism, institutional corruption, blind superstition, and state-sponsored intolerance. It was the systemic network of power that used fear, ignorance, and physical violence to control the minds and bodies of human beings. Voltaire saw the infamous thing in the secret courts that tortured accused individuals, in the religious authorities who burned books that questioned official doctrine, and in the corrupt leaders who used public executions to enforce intellectual submission. It was the monstrous mindset that claimed absolute knowledge of divine truth and used that claim to justify cruelty, oppression, and slaughter. The infamous thing operated as an unholy alliance between absolute political rulers and corrupt religious institutions. In 18th century Europe, these two forces worked together to protect their shared privilege and power. Absolute monarchs claimed their authority came directly from heaven, and they used the law and the military to enforce religious conformity. In return, church leaders taught the population that obeying the king was a divine duty, and that questioning official authority would result in eternal punishment. This closed system of mutual protection made it virtually impossible for ordinary citizens to demand basic rights, justice, or fair treatment. Anyone who dared to expose corruption or suggest rational reforms was instantly crushed by the combined weight of state and religious power. Voltaire saw how this oppressive system inflicted massive damage on every level of human society. It kept millions of people in a state of perpetual poverty and fear, teaching them that their miserable conditions were unchangeable divine fate. It starved the public of real education, substituting scientific facts with absurd fables, magical omens, and fear of evil spirits. It turned members of different religious groups against one another, creating an atmosphere of constant suspicion, hatred, and potential violence. Voltaire recognized that as long as the infamous thing dominated European culture, genuine human progress, scientific discovery, legal justice, and individual freedom would remain impossible. By rallying his fellow intellectuals around the call to crush the infamous thing, Voltaire transformed writing into an active form of public resistance. Before this period, scholars and writers often worked in isolation, producing difficult theoretical texts for small academic circles. Voltaire urged his fellow thinkers, known across Europe as the philosophers, to come together as an organized intellectual movement. He insisted that philosophy must leave the quiet libraries and stepped directly into the public battleground. Writers had a solemn duty to use their pens as weapons, exposing injustice, challenging corrupt officials, and educating the public until the structures of tyranny crumbled. The strategy of Voltaire for crushing the infamous thing relied heavily on the power of relentless public exposure. He understood that abusive institutions thrive in secrecy, silence, and dark corners where their actions go unnoticed. When authorities operate without public scrutiny, they can commit acts of extreme cruelty without consequence. Voltaire used his global fame, his vast network of correspondence, and his literary talents to shine a bright light on every act of institutional abuse he discovered. Whenever a corrupt court tortured an innocent person or a fanatical crowd persecuted a minority family, Voltaire wrote articles, essays, letters, and pamphlets that exposed the crime to readers across the entire world. By turning local atrocities into international scandals, he forced powerful leaders to feel the sting of public shame. Furthermore, Voltaire demonstrated that crushing the infamous thing required practical intervention alongside philosophical writing. He did not simply sit in his comfortable estate writing abstract complaints about injustice. When real human beings were targeted by fanatical courts, Voltaire used his own personal wealth to hire lawyers, gather evidence, print legal appeals, and shelter victims of persecution. He spent years of his life fighting to clear the names of innocent men who had been executed, securing the release of survivors from prison, and restoring confiscated property to broken families. Through these intense personal campaigns, Voltaire showed that fighting oppression requires real sacrifice, active courage, and practical effort. The crusade against the infamous thing also reshaped how society viewed traditional authority. For centuries, people had been taught to treat ancient institutions, high officials, and traditional doctrines with automatic, unquestioning awe. Voltaire shattered this unearned respect through his devastating use of clear logic and sharp humor. He showed the world that powerful institutions are made of ordinary, flawed human beings who are often greedy, ignorant, or cruel. By stripping away the majestic robes and sacred pretenses of corrupt authority figures, Voltaire made them look ridiculous and human. Once the public stopped fearing official authority and began viewing it critically, the infamous thing lost its magical hold over the human mind. It is important to note that Voltaire did not advocate for violent revolution as the method to crush the infamous thing. He was deeply suspicious of violent mobs and sudden bloody uprisings, which he feared would simply lead to new forms of tyranny and chaos. Instead, he favored a peaceful intellectual revolution driven by education, legal reform, freedom of speech, and the gradual spread of rational thought. He believed that if society could build a strong culture of critical thinking and open debate, the infamous thing would naturally lose its power and collapse under the weight of its own absurdity. The famous battle cry of Voltaire carries deep philosophical lessons that remain vital for our modern world. The specific institutions that Voltaire fought in the 18th century may have changed, but the underlying psychology of the infamous thing remains a constant threat in human history. Whenever a political movement, a religious group, or an ideological system claims total possession of truth, demands absolute obedience, and uses intimidation or coercion to silence dissenting voices, the infamous thing is present once again. The philosophy of Voltaire reminds us that we must never allow any institution to place itself above critical examination or basic human empathy. Crushing the infamous thing requires every generation to cultivate an active sense of moral vigilance. We must remain on guard against the subtle ways that intolerance and fanatical thinking creep back into public life. It is easy to recognize tyranny when it appears in obvious, violent forms, but the infamous thing often begins quietly, taking root through small acts of censorship, the gradual erosion of individual rights, and the demonization of minority groups. Voltaire taught humanity that small abuses of power must be resisted immediately before they grow into massive systems of destruction. Moreover, the motto of Voltaire emphasizes that true moral courage consists in standing up for justice even when it is difficult, unpopular, or dangerous. Voltaire faced constant threats of arrest, exile, and financial ruin for challenging the ruling elite of his era. Yet he refused to remain silent while innocent people suffered under unjust laws. He proved that a single dedicated individual, armed with truth, reason, and an unyielding pen, can challenge powerful empires and change the moral direction of human society. In the final analysis, the campaign to crush the infamous thing was a profound declaration of love for humanity. Voltaire did not spend his life fighting corrupt institutions out of pure anger or hatred for his enemies. He fought because he possessed a deep, compassionate desire to see human beings live happy, peaceful, and meaningful lives free from terror and unnecessary suffering. He wanted a world where people could think without fear, speak without permission, practice their beliefs in peace, and enjoy the basic joys of human existence. As we reflect on this central theme of the philosophy of Voltaire, we see that Écrasez l'infâme is not merely a historical relic from the Enlightenment. It is a timeless moral obligation for anyone who values freedom, truth, and human dignity. It calls upon us to challenge systemic cruelty wherever we find it, to expose lies with clear evidence, to defend victims of persecution, and to ensure that the light of reason continues to scatter the dark shadows of fanaticism and oppression. The legacy of this battle cry can be seen in every modern progress toward human rights, legal fairness, and freedom of expression. Whenever laws are updated to protect individual liberties, whenever corrupt leaders are held accountable by an independent press, and whenever communities stand up against bigotry and hatred, the spirit of Voltaire is actively at work. By refusing to bow before corrupt power, Voltaire showed humanity that tyranny is not permanent, and that the practical application of reason and empathy can build a fairer world for all. The work of crushing the infamous thing is an ongoing project that belongs to every living human being. Intolerance, systemic prejudice, and the abuse of authority do not disappear on their own. They are held back only by the continuous efforts of thoughtful, courageous citizens. Voltaire passed this intellectual torch down to future generations, trusting that we would continue the fight against dark ignorance and cruelty. His life and writings remain an enduring reminder that the struggle for human liberation requires unyielding commitment, clear thinking, and the bold courage to speak truth to power. To understand the life work of Voltaire, one must examine his relentless and fearless criticism of the Roman Catholic Church. In 18th century France, the church was not merely a spiritual institution where people gathered for Sunday prayers. It was a colossal, wealthy, and dominant political force that touched every single aspect of daily human existence. The church owned vast amounts of land across the nation, collected compulsory taxes from struggling peasants, controlled the legal registration of births, marriages, and deaths, and maintained a total monopoly over education and public publishing. Voltaire saw this massive concentration of unchecked power as the single greatest obstacle to human freedom, scientific progress, and social justice. Voltaire frequently pointed out the glaring contradiction between the original teachings of Christianity and the actual behavior of the church hierarchy. He studied the early historical texts of the Christian faith and noted that Jesus of Nazareth preached messages of poverty, humility, profound love, and forgiveness. Jesus lived a simple life, ate with outcasts, and warned against the love of money and power. In stark contrast, the high authorities of the Catholic Church, including popes, cardinals, and bishops, lived in immense luxury. They inhabited magnificent palaces, wore robes trimmed with gold, engaged in complex political schemes, and accumulated vast private fortunes. Voltaire exposed this deep hypocrisy, showing his readers that an institution claiming to represent a humble teacher had transformed into a greedy, worldly empire. Another major focus of the critique of Voltaire was the heavy reliance of the church on superstition, fake miracles, and absurd relics. Throughout Europe, churches and monasteries displayed pieces of wood claimed to be parts of the Holy Cross, ancient bones said to belong to saints, and vials of liquid claimed to be milk or blood from holy figures. Monks and priests told gullible believers that viewing these objects or paying money to churches would cure physical illnesses, forgive sins, and shorten time in purgatory. Voltaire used his sharp wit to mock these practices, pointing out that if all the claimed pieces of the cross were gathered together, they would build an entire fleet of wooden ships. He argued that these manufactured miracles and superstitious fables were designed to keep uneducated citizens in perpetual fear, while extracting their hard-earned money to enrich the clergy. The Church also maintained an aggressive monopoly over truth, violently suppressing any scientific discovery or philosophical idea that contradicted official Church doctrine. Voltaire continually reminded the public of how the Church had treated brilliant scientists who sought to understand the natural universe. He highlighted the famous case of Galileo Galilei, the great Italian astronomer who was brought before the Inquisition, threatened with physical torture, and forced to renounce his proven scientific discovery that the Earth moves around the sun. Voltaire argued that when a religious institution claims to possess all truth and forbids scientists from examining natural facts, it traps human society in dark ignorance and halts the natural evolution of human knowledge. The censorship apparatus operated by the Catholic Church was another prime target of Voltaire. The Church maintained an official list of forbidden books, known as the Index of Prohibited Works. Any book placed on this list was banned from publication, sale, or ownership across Catholic territories. Censors examined every page of manuscript to ensure it contained no ideas that might lead readers to question church authority, traditional dogmatic rules, or official morality. Authors who attempted to publish unauthorized works faced severe penalties, including hefty fines, loss of property, public whipping, imprisonment, or exile. Voltaire spent decades playing a cat-and-mouse game with these censors, showing the world that an institution that must hide books and silence writers is an institution terrified of truth and reason. Perhaps the most horrifying aspect of the Catholic Church for Voltaire was its long, dark history of judicial violence and execution through the Inquisition. The Inquisition was a powerful tribunal system established by the Church to identify, try, and punish individuals accused of heresy or religious deviance. Trials were conducted in complete secrecy. Accused individuals were denied defense lawyers, and brutal physical torture was routinely used to force confessions. Those found guilty were often burned alive at the stake in public spectacles before cheering crowds. Voltaire detailed these historic atrocities in his essays and books, driving home the point that an institution that tortures and burns human beings in the name of God is acting in a manner that is deeply evil and barbaric. Voltaire also criticized the internal practices of religious orders, particularly the enforced celibacy of priests and the practice of sending young men and women into monasteries and convents. In 18th century France, noble families often forced their younger children to enter religious orders against their true personal desires, so that the family wealth and land could be passed intact to the eldest son. Thousands of young people were locked away in quiet monasteries for life, bound by strict religious vows they had not freely chosen. Voltaire argued that forced celibacy went directly against natural human biology and psychological needs. He exposed how this artificial lifestyle often produced deep emotional suffering, hidden corruption, and moral decay behind the closed doors of religious institutions. The political pact between the Catholic Church and absolute monarchs was another major danger exposed by Voltaire. The Church provided royal rulers with moral legitimacy by preaching the divine right of kings, telling the population that disobeying the ruler was a sin against God. In return, the king used the physical power of the state, including the military, police, and royal courts, to enforce church doctrines, collect church taxes, and crush religious dissenters. This alliance created a fortress of power that protected the privileges of the ruling elite while leaving ordinary citizens with no legal rights or voice in their government. Voltaire argued that true liberty would remain impossible until the Church was completely separated from the state. It is crucial to emphasize that Voltaire did not criticize the Catholic Church out of a desire to destroy all morality or foster social chaos. On the contrary, he believed that genuine morality was essential for human society. However, he insisted that morality comes from reason, human empathy, and universal laws of nature, not from church dogmas, fear of hell, or payments to priests. In the view of Voltaire, A person who treats their neighbors with fairness, honesty, and kindness is living a truly moral life, regardless of whether they attend Catholic Mass or accept official doctrines. He sought to liberate morality from the control of the clergy so that people could act good out of rational conviction rather than forced fear. The relentless writings of Voltaire against the Catholic Church had a profound and irreversible impact on European culture. By exposing church abuses through clear logic, historic evidence, and engaging satire, he broke the spell of unthinking obedience that had held Europe captive for centuries. Readers across the continent began to read the Bible and church history with a critical eye, questioning the authority of priests and demanding basic reforms. His work laid the intellectual groundwork for the secularization of Europe, leading to legal reforms that stripped the church of its political power, abolished the Inquisition, established religious freedom, and created public educational systems free from clerical control. In conclusion, the critique of the Catholic Church by Voltaire was not a bitter personal feud, but a heroic defense of human dignity, rational thought, and individual freedom. He saw an institution that had used its immense power to suppress truth, protect corruption, and inflict horrific violence on innocent people. By raising his voice against this giant force, Voltaire demonstrated immense personal courage, risking his life, freedom, and fortune to speak truth to power. His writings remain a timeless reminder that no institution, no matter how ancient, wealthy, or sacred it claims to be, should ever be exempt from critical examination, moral accountability, and human reason. The lessons of this critique extend far beyond the specific historical context of 18th century Catholicism. Voltaire taught humanity that whenever an institution combines absolute authority with financial wealth and claims an exclusive monopoly on truth, it inevitably becomes corrupt and tyrannical. The fight of Voltaire against church overreach teaches every generation to remain vigilant against ideological power structures that attempt to dictate what people must think, believe, and express. By insisting on evidence, reason, and basic human rights, Voltaire gave humanity the tools needed to challenge institutional oppression and build a society where the mind remains completely free. Voltaire also showed that criticizing an institution is an act of deep care for society, not an act of destruction. He did not want to leave society in a state of chaotic lawlessness. He wanted to replace a dark system based on fear, superstition, and forced conformity with a bright society based on rational laws, mutual respect, scientific discovery, and genuine compassion. His critique cleared away the old ruins of institutional tyranny so that future generations could build a cleaner, fairer, and more humane world. The voice of Voltaire continues to echo down through the centuries, urging humanity to stand firm against institutional cruelty and keep the light of reason burning bright. Tolerance is far more than a quiet agreement to ignore differences. For Voltaire, tolerance was an active, living practice that makes civilization possible. In a world where people hold wildly different views on religion, politics, and culture, peaceful living requires mutual respect. Voltaire pointed out that intolerance always produces conflict, fear, and suffering. When a group tries to force its beliefs on everyone else, it creates an atmosphere of paranoia and division. True tolerance allows individuals to hold their own values without fearing violence or harassment from their neighbors. By creating space for diverse ideas, society grows stronger, more flexible, and more peaceful. Tolerance is not a sign of weakness or uncertainty, but a display of maturity and wisdom. It acknowledges that human beings are diverse by nature, and that harmony can only exist when we grant others the same liberty we demand for ourselves. In a tolerant society, people build connections through commerce, art, and shared community work, leaving behind destructive conflicts over personal beliefs. Human beings often pretend to know far more than they actually do. Voltaire warned against this arrogant tendency, urging people to recognize the natural limits of human understanding. We can observe physical facts, test natural laws, and build practical tools, but we cannot solve every mysterious question of the universe. When philosophers and theologians build giant systems of thought based on pure guess, they easily drift into delusion. Voltaire argued that admitting our ignorance is the first step toward genuine wisdom. By accepting what we do not know, we avoid harmful dogmas and focus our minds on practical truths that improve daily life. Recognizing human limits fosters intellectual humility. It prevents leaders from imposing abstract theories on society through force. Voltaire reminded his readers that the universe is vast, and our human tools of perception are limited. We must focus our intellect on what is useful, tangible, and verifiable, rather than wasting energy on grand metaphysical mysteries that lie beyond human reach. During his stay in England, Voltaire discovered the revolutionary ideas of John Locke, which transformed his entire approach to philosophy. Locke taught that the human mind begins like a blank page, and all knowledge comes from sensory experience and careful observation. Voltaire embraced this empirical perspective completely. He rejected abstract metaphysical theories that could not be tested or proven. For Voltaire, real truth is grounded in what we can see, measure, and verify through direct experience. This empirical mindset liberated philosophy from empty academic debates and connected it directly with physical reality. Empiricism taught people to trust evidence rather than traditional authority. Instead of relying on ancient texts or official declarations, thinkers were encouraged to examine the world with their own eyes. Voltaire used empiricism to challenge long-held superstitions and unproven assumptions. By insisting on observation and practical facts, he helped build a modern culture of critical inquiry that values evidence above ancient tradition. Voltaire was a passionate supporter of modern science, especially the physics of Isaac Newton. He recognized that scientific discovery is the primary engine of human progress. While ancient scholars spent centuries arguing over abstract concepts, scientists like Newton used mathematics and careful experiment to explain how the physical universe actually operates. Voltaire wrote popular books to explain Newton's discoveries to the public, bringing science out of academic circles. He believed that science frees humanity from fear, cures diseases, improves agriculture, and builds a better world. Science proved that human reason can understand natural laws and use that knowledge to solve real human problems. The pursuit of scientific truth builds a mindset of continuous improvement. Each discovery lays the groundwork for further advances, creating a cumulative path toward human betterment. Voltaire saw science not merely as a collection of facts, but as a grand human effort that unites people across national borders in a common pursuit of truth and utility. Superstition was viewed by Voltaire as a dark shadow across the human mind. It leads people to believe in bad omens, curses, magical relics, and unpredictable spirits. Voltaire showed how superstition relies on fear and lack of education. When people do not understand natural causes, they invent supernatural explanations for ordinary events like storms, sickness, or bad luck. Crafty leaders and corrupt institutions often use these superstitious fears to manipulate the population, maintain control, and gain wealth. Voltaire used clear logic and sharp humor to expose these illusions, teaching people to look for natural, rational causes behind every event in their lives. Replacing superstition with rational understanding liberates humanity from constant anxiety. When people learn how nature works, they no longer waste time performing superstitious rituals or living in fear of invisible forces. They learn to take practical steps to protect their health, build sturdy structures, and solve problems through knowledge rather than fear. In the 18th century, a popular philosophical view known as optimism claimed that everything in the world is designed for the ultimate best by a divine creator. This theory taught that even suffering, disease, and war are necessary parts of a grand plan where all is for the best. Voltaire came to reject this view completely. He saw that forced optimism ignores real human suffering and encourages people to accept injustice passively. Voltaire argued that pain and evil are real, brutal facts of human life. Pretending that everything is perfect prevents us from taking action to reduce suffering and fix real problems. Blind optimism serves as a comfortable excuse for apathy. If every tragedy is part of a perfect plan, then there is no reason to improve hospitals, reform laws, or help victims of disaster. Voltaire insisted on facing the reality of human suffering honestly. Because acknowledging pain is the necessary first step toward relieving it through practical effort and human compassion. To challenge blind optimism, Voltaire wrote his most famous literary work, a short novel titled Candide. The story follows a naive young man named Candide who travels the world with his teacher, Pangloss. Pangloss continuously insists that this is the best of all possible worlds, even as they face horrors like war, slavery, shipwrecks, earthquakes, disease, and torture. Through relentless humor and wild adventure, Voltaire exposes the absurdity of ignoring human misery. Candide experiences the painful reality of life, eventually learning that empty philosophical theories cannot protect anyone from suffering or feed a hungry family. The story of Candide serves as a brilliant critique of abstract philosophy disconnected from reality. As Candide travels from one disaster to another, the cheerful slogans of his teacher become increasingly ridiculous. Voltaire uses satire to wake his readers up, showing that theoretical optimism is useless when faced with the actual challenges of the human condition. A major turning point in the thinking of Voltaire occurred in 1755, when a massive earthquake destroyed the city of Lisbon. Tens of thousands of innocent citizens died in a matter of minutes as buildings collapsed and fires swept through the city on a holy day. This terrible disaster shattered the comfortable doctrine of divine optimism. Philosophers could no longer claim that every event served a harmonious divine purpose. Voltaire wrote a moving poem about the disaster, expressing deep grief for the victims and challenging the idea that a benevolent force ordained such destruction. The tragedy proved that nature can be indifferent to human life. The disaster forced thinkers to confront the harsh realities of physical existence. Voltaire pointed out that earthquakes are natural events, not divine punishments or deliberate steps in a moral plan. By viewing natural disasters realistically, society could focus on practical measures like building safer structures and helping survivors, rather than searching for mystical meanings in human tragedy. Although Voltaire rejected naive optimism, he did not surrender to dark, hopeless pessimism. Complete pessimism leads to inaction, making people believe that effort is useless because the world will always be terrible. Voltaire chose a balanced middle path that can best be described as practical realism. He acknowledged that the world is full of flaws, suffering, and uncertainty, but he insisted that human effort still matters. We cannot fix every flaw in nature or eliminate all pain, but we can make our immediate environment safer, fairer, and more comfortable. Practical realism replaces useless complaining with constructive action. It gives people a clear-eyed view of existence. A practical realist recognizes obstacles without giving up hope. By focusing on achievable goals, we can make steady improvements in human life. Voltaire demonstrated that even in an imperfect world, courage, intelligence, and hard work can reduce suffering and build a more decent society for future generations. At the conclusion of his story Candide, Voltaire offers his ultimate advice for living a good life, expressed in the memorable phrase, "We must cultivate our garden." This simple phrase contains a profound philosophical lesson. Instead of wasting our limited time and energy on abstract philosophical debates or trying to fix cosmic problems beyond our control, we should focus on immediate, practical work. Cultivating a garden means taking care of our local community, performing useful tasks, helping our neighbors, and building a productive life. Through practical daily labor, human beings find purpose, peace, and real satisfaction in a confusing world. This philosophy turns attention away from grand theories and directs it toward practical action. When we cultivate our own garden, we make our small corner of the world more fertile, beautiful, and sustainable. Voltaire teaches us that human happiness is built through modest, regular effort, honest work, and active care for our immediate surroundings. Philosophy for Voltaire was not an academic game played in quiet university rooms. He believed that true philosophy must be practical, energetic, and immediately useful to human life. An idea that does not help relieve human suffering or improve human conditions has very little value. Voltaire judged every philosophical theory by its real-world results. If a system of thought leads to useful inventions, fairer laws, cleaner cities, and greater kindness, then it is valuable. If it leads to bitter arguments, religious persecution, or passive acceptance of poverty, then it is useless or harmful. Practical philosophy demands that thinkers step out into the world, observe actual human problems, and use their intelligence to create tangible solutions. Voltaire modeled this approach throughout his life, spending his wealth and energy on agricultural improvements, local industries, legal defense funds, and public campaigns against corruption. Voltaire held a deep passion for legal justice, viewing a fair court system as the primary mark of a civilized society. In his time, the legal system was deeply flawed, secretive, and cruel. Judges possessed total authority, trials were held behind closed doors, and physical torture was regularly used to force suspects to confess. Punishments were often terrifyingly harsh, especially for poor citizens who had no influential connections. Voltaire argued that justice must be open to public view, consistent, and based strictly on verified evidence. He insisted that the true purpose of punishment is to protect society and reform the criminal, not to satisfy a bloody desire for revenge. Legal rules must apply equally to rich nobles and poor peasants alike. By demanding clear laws and fair trials, Voltaire helped spark legal reforms across Europe that abolished judicial torture and established basic legal rights for all people. The most famous legal battle of Voltaire began when a Protestant merchant named Jean Carles was falsely accused of murdering his own son in Toulouse. The young man had committed suicide, but local fanatical judges claimed the father killed him to prevent him from converting to Catholicism. Driven by religious prejudice, the court sentenced Jean Carles to a horrific public execution, breaking his bones on a wheel before strangling him. His family was ruined and their property was seized. When Voltaire learned of this outrage, he dedicated years of his life to setting things right. He wrote letters to international leaders, printed detailed legal pamphlets, hired top lawyers, and funded court appeals out of his own pocket. His tireless efforts eventually forced a complete review of the case, proving Jean Carles innocent, clearing his name, and restoring the remaining family honor and property. This triumph showed the world the immense power of public opinion against judicial murder. Voltaire was a pioneer in developing the concept of universal human rights and basic civil liberties. He argued that every human being, simply by being born, possesses fundamental rights that no government or church can rightfully take away. These natural rights include the safety of one body, the freedom to speak one mind, the ownership of private property, and protection from arbitrary arrest. In an era when citizens were treated as disposable subjects of absolute rulers, Voltaire asserted that governments exist to serve the people, not the other way around. Laws should act as shields that protect weaker individuals from the tyranny of the powerful. Voltaire recognized that civil liberties are fragile creations that require constant protection. When a society fails to protect the rights of its weakest members, the security of every citizen is endangered. His writings provided the emotional and intellectual foundation for modern bills of rights and constitutional protections around the globe. The relationship between Voltaire and democracy was subtle and complex. He lived in a century before modern representative democracy was widely established, and he was deeply suspicious of uneducated political mobs. He feared that a sudden rule by the uneducated masses could easily devolve into chaos, passion, and new forms of tyranny. However, Voltaire was equally opposed to absolute dictatorship and royal oppression. He favored a balanced government system bound by clear laws and constitutional limits, similar to the English system he admired. He wanted a society where individual liberties were fully guaranteed, freedom of speech was absolute, and talented citizens could rise based on merit rather than royal titles. Voltaire believed that true democracy requires an educated public capable of independent, rational thought. Without widespread education and critical reasoning, democracy risks falling prey to manipulative demagogues who exploit public fear and hatred for their own gain. Because Voltaire was cautious about sudden revolutions led by the masses, he often placed his hopes for social reform in what he called enlightened monarchs. He believed that an educated, rational ruler who embraced Enlightenment philosophy could transform society faster and more peacefully than any violent uprising. An enlightened monarch would use their royal power to build good schools, establish fair courts, protect religious minorities, foster science, and encourage economic growth. Voltaire spent years cultivating close relationships with powerful European rulers, most notably King Frederick the Great of Prussia and Empress Catherine the Great of Russia. He wrote thousands of letters advising them on legal reforms, tolerance, and public policy. While he eventually realized that monarchs often cared more about expanding their empires than honoring philosophical ideals, his efforts helped convince several European rulers to end torture, reduce censorship, and introduce humane social policies within their kingdoms. Voltaire maintained a careful and strategic relationship with political power. He understood that to achieve practical reforms, a philosopher cannot remain completely isolated from the halls of authority. He used his fame, literary skill, and high social standing to gain access to kings, ministers, and influential nobles. Yet Voltaire knew the grave dangers of becoming a flattering servant to power. Whenever rulers acted with cruelty or engaged in aggressive, wasteful wars, Voltaire picked up his pen and criticized their actions. He maintained his financial independence through smart investments, which allowed him to speak truth to power without fearing immediate financial ruin. Voltaire taught that the proper role of an intellectual is to act as a permanent moral supervisor over political authority. Thinkers must praise rulers when they enact just policies, but expose them without hesitation when they abuse their power or trample on human rights. Voltaire looked at social inequality through a realistic and practical lens. He did not advocate for total economic equality, which he viewed as an impossible dream in a complex human society. He believed that different talents, levels of effort, and natural skills will naturally lead to variations in wealth and property. However, Voltaire fiercely opposed legal inequality, privilege based solely on noble birth, and systemic economic oppression. He hated a feudal system where wealthy aristocrats and high church officials paid no taxes while poor peasants were crushed under brutal tax burdens and forced labor. Voltaire argued that every person, regardless of their social class, must be subject to the exact same laws and pay their fair share of taxes. He championed economic mobility, commercial freedom, and the growth of a strong middle class, believing that an active economy based on honest trade provides the best path out of widespread poverty. One of the most famous intellectual battles in history was fought between Voltaire and Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Rousseau argued that human beings were originally innocent and happy in a natural state, and that modern civilization, art, and science had corrupted human morality. Voltaire rejected this romantic idea completely. In a famous and witty letter, Voltaire thanked Rousseau for his book, remarking that reading it made one feel like walking on all four legs like an animal, but that he had lost that habit 60 years ago. Voltaire defended civilization, science, theater, medicine, and urban culture as triumphantly good achievements. He acknowledged that civilization has flaws, but insisted that the cure for social problems is more reason, better education, and superior laws, not a backward retreat into primitive wilderness. This debate defined two opposing views of human history, with Voltaire standing firmly as the champion of human progress, culture, and rational development. Freedom of speech was the absolute engine of all philosophical and social progress for Voltaire. He recognized that without the right to express opinions, criticize authority, and publish new ideas, every other human freedom remains weak and temporary. Even though a famous quote about defending to the death your right to speak was actually written by a later biographer summarizing his stance, it captures his true philosophy perfectly. Voltaire spent his life facing state censorship, banned books, and political exile, yet he never ceased writing. He insisted that the free exchange of ideas is essential for uncovering truth, exposing corruption, and preventing government tyranny. A society that silences dissenting voices is a society trapped in fear and decline. Voltaire demonstrated that free speech must protect even unpopular or uncomfortable opinions, because the true test of liberty lies in our willingness to allow others to speak thoughts that challenge our own comfortable beliefs. Satire was the most effective instrument in the literary collection of Voltaire. When a writer directly attacks powerful institutions, those institutions often respond with violent force, imprisonment, or legal punishment. Voltaire realized that laughter is far harder for authorities to suppress. When an idea is made to look ridiculous through sharp wit, it loses its majestic aura and terrifying power over the public mind. Voltaire used satire to expose the vanity of nobles, the greed of corrupt priests, and the foolishness of fanatical judges. His witty stories and biting essays allowed complex philosophical truths to enter everyday public conversations. By making people laugh at corrupt authority, Voltaire stripped tyrants of their dignity, opening the door for genuine, rational critique. Humor for Voltaire was not merely entertainment, it was a deliberate strategy for enlightenment. Serious theoretical books often reach only a small group of educated scholars, while humorous stories are read by thousands of ordinary citizens. Voltaire understood that if philosophy is going to transform human culture, it must be enjoyable, engaging, and easy to read. Humor acts as a gentle medicine that helps people digest difficult, uncomfortable truths. When readers laugh at a foolish character or an absurd law, they are participating in critical thinking without feeling defensive. Humor also breaks through mental barriers built by habit, fear, and tradition. Through comedy, Voltaire made reason appealing, persuasive, and unforgettable to generations of readers across the world. The perspective of Voltaire on human nature was practical, clear-eyed, and balanced. He rejected the dark religious view that human beings are born naturally evil and hopelessly corrupt. At the same time, he dismissed the romantic belief that humans are naturally perfect angels who are only corrupted by society. Voltaire viewed human nature as a mixture of passions, desires, flaws, and the potential for logical thought. We are driven by self-interest, fear, and habit, but we also possess empathy, curiosity, and the capacity for moral growth. Education and fair laws are essential because they guide our selfish instincts toward constructive social harmony. Voltaire believed that human beings are capable of great good when guided by reason, but capable of horrific evil when controlled by fanaticism and superstition. Civilization was celebrated by Voltaire as one of the greatest triumphs of the human species. He did not long for an imaginary primitive past, but championed the urban arts, medical advances, legal systems, and scientific knowledge of modern life. Progress for Voltaire was not an automatic law of history, but a fragile accomplishment that requires continuous hard work, education, and defense against ignorance. Civilization improves when societies reduce violence, abolish torture, expand education, and protect creative thought. Every theater, library, farm, and laboratory represents a victory over wild nature and dark barbarism. Voltaire urged humanity to value, refine, and protect the fruits of civilization, recognizing that culture and reason are our best tools for building a peaceful world. The tension between individual freedom and institutional authority lies at the heart of the life work of Voltaire. Throughout history, kings, governments, and churches have demanded absolute obedience from the individual, treating citizens as passive subjects. Voltaire asserted that the individual mind possesses an inherent value that no authority has the right to crush. An individual must never be forced to sacrifice their private conscience, logical reason, or basic human rights to satisfy the demands of powerful leaders. When official authority conflicts with truth and justice, the individual has a moral right to question, challenge, and resist that authority. By placing the dignity of the individual above the power of institutions, Voltaire established a core principle of modern human rights. Tolerance matters because it is the only viable foundation for human survival and social peace. In a diverse world where people hold conflicting opinions on religion, politics, and culture, intolerance leads directly to perpetual war, hatred, and social destruction. Voltaire pointed out that no single group possesses absolute truth about every aspect of existence. When we practice tolerance, we acknowledge our shared human limitations and build an environment where different communities can live, work, and trade together in security. Tolerance fosters creativity, economic prosperity, and intellectual vitality by allowing diverse perspectives to enrich society. A tolerant nation transforms potential conflict into peaceful collaboration, proving that harmony is built through mutual respect rather than forced conformity. Few things worried Voltaire more than absolute intellectual certainty. When a leader, church, or political movement believes it possesses complete and unquestionable truth, it inevitably treats all differing views as dangerous evil. Absolute certainty closes the mind to new evidence, destroys empathy, and justifies acts of extreme cruelty in the name of a higher cause. Voltaire insisted that healthy doubt is essential for moral safety and intellectual growth. Recognizing that our knowledge is limited prevents us from imposing our beliefs on others through force. By abandoning the illusion of absolute certainty, humanity can cultivate intellectual humility, engage in open debate, and remain open to learning, adapting, and making fair decisions. Like all complex historical figures, Voltaire embodied significant personal contradictions throughout his long life. He championed the rights of the poor and fought against legal cruelty, yet he accumulated immense personal wealth through financial speculation and lived in magnificent estates. He criticized absolute monarchs, yet he sought the friendship and protection of powerful kings and queens. He defended universal human rights, yet some of his private writings contained prejudices typical of his era. Voltaire was a man of intense passion, occasionally driven by vanity and personal rivalries alongside his grand moral crusades. Recognizing these contradictions does not lessen his philosophical impact, but reminds us that even the greatest champions of human freedom are flawed human beings working within the limitations of their time. The philosophy of Voltaire remains astonishingly relevant to the challenges of modern life. We live in an era shaped by rapid technological change, intense political division, and continuous streams of information and propaganda. The insistence of Voltaire on empirical evidence, logical thought, and healthy doubt provides a vital defense against modern misinformation and fanatical echo chambers. His passionate defense of civil liberties, free speech, and religious neutrality remains the bedrock of democratic societies. Whenever modern citizens demand transparent justice, challenge abusive corporate or state power, or defend the rights of unpopular minorities, they are practicing the philosophy of Voltaire. His work reminds us that reason and tolerance are active duties that must be practiced daily. If Voltaire lived in the age of modern social media, he would recognize many familiar patterns of human behavior. He would see online mobs, viral outrage, emotional manipulation, and the rapid spread of fanatical conspiracy theories as modern manifestations of the ancient infamous thing. At the same time, Voltaire would appreciate how digital technology gives every citizen a voice, bypassing traditional censors and allowing rapid public exposure of corporate and political corruption. He would likely use digital platforms to write sharp, witty commentary, expose injustice, and rally public opinion against tyranny. However, he would warn modern users not to let online spaces become echo chambers of emotional rage, urging people to maintain logical thought, verify facts, and practice tolerance. If Voltaire could speak directly to a modern person today, his message would be clear, urgent, and practical. He would tell us not to take our hard-won freedoms for granted, reminding us that liberty, free speech, and legal justice can be quickly eroded if citizens become passive and indifferent. He would urge us to value scientific facts over emotional outrage, to question authority figures who demand absolute obedience, and to reject all forms of ideological fanaticism. He would remind us that human happiness is not found in grand abstract promises or bitter online arguments, but in meaningful daily work, local community service, and active kindness toward our neighbors. Above all, he would tell us to think for ourselves and defend the rights of others to do the same. The central philosophy of Voltaire can be summarized as a relentless commitment to human freedom, rational thought, and active compassion. He saw humanity caught in a continuous struggle between the light of reason and the darkness of fanatical ignorance. Philosophy for Voltaire was not a passive collection of theories, but an active lifestyle dedicated to reducing suffering, exposing injustice, and expanding human knowledge. He united deist spiritual reverence with scientific empiricism, practical legal reform, and absolute defense of free expression. His central philosophy teaches that we are responsible for our own world. Through education, clear logic, mutual tolerance, and practical effort, human beings can scatter the shadows of tyranny and build a world worthy of human dignity. The final and most lasting idea of Voltaire returns us to the simple, profound command to cultivate our garden. After exploring the grand questions of theology, government, history, and science, Voltaire brings human wisdom back to the soil of daily existence. The world is complex, full of natural hardships, social flaws, and unpredictable events that lie far beyond our individual control. Trying to fix the entire cosmos leads only to frustration and empty argument. However, we have total power over our immediate garden, our local work, our family, our community, and our personal behavior. By directing our energy toward practical, honest labor, we make our immediate surroundings more productive, beautiful, and peaceful. Cultivating your garden is the ultimate act of rational living, an enduring formula for personal fulfillment and quiet human triumph.